I would say the title is self-explanatory. What if? Of course, that means any number of hyperboles, doesn't it? In this case, the question really relates to time travel. What if you had the chance to go back in time and to either meet up with your loved ones or just basically to try to alter history? Not so much that you would change it, but that you could inform your family, your loved ones of any event that you know is going to happen in the future. Would you put priority on your own family as far as something that happened to you or something that will happen as far as in the future by a loved one? Would you change that history, or would you try to change a known historical event such as John F. Kennedy's assassination, 9/11, 2001? There's just so many ideas, you know. I personally would think if you could go back in time, it would be just simply to observe these things, to know the facts without doubt that it did happen that way. And that's really the reason for the video, is just to make the assumption that if people could do anything relating to time travel, would not it be more important to just verify what happened rather than to change what's inevitably going to happen? Because there's always a reason for things that do happen in history. You know, there's some shows I've seen, just for an example, on John F. Kennedy. There was an episode on the Twilight Zone, and this scientist, he went 100 years into the past from 2063 back to 1963. And he actually altered history. He stopped the assassination of Kennedy. And all these hyperbole things happen as a result. Of course, it's the altercation of the space-time continuum. That's what happened. And because of what he did, there were really no scenarios that he could change as a result of altering history to keep a nuclear war from happening with all the other nations. That it would have been a complete annihilation of the human race. And I can't really get into it because there's a lot of things that were going on at the time that this individual, he was at the White House with Kennedy talking about an heirloom he had of, it was an actual a silver dollar with Kennedy's likeness, and he's trying to explain to the president, well, where did you get this? I know they never made one like this. And eventually he has to confide in Kennedy that he has come back in time to observe historical events and that he came to see Kennedy. But Kennedy didn't realize that he was supposed to have died in Dallas. And now you have, of all the scenarios they talk about, one is that there are two major tornadoes heading through Dallas or through Texas, and Governor Connolly, he was telling the president when he left Dallas that he's got to hang around and see whether or not there's anything he can do as far as if there's any major catastrophe from this happening, because in history it never did happen. Plus, another hyperbole or altercation was that Khrushchev was assassinated because of Kennedy being not assassinated in Dallas. So this creates kind of like an escalation of events that makes all of the different nations of the world fight against each other. They create a World War III. And so for the only way for this to be corrected, the doctor either has to go back and alter history again so that Kennedy dies, which he didn't do, or he takes Kennedy's place and sends Kennedy back into the future so that this way Kennedy lives, but the doctor ends up dying at the end of the episode. So that is one reason why my personal feeling is if you went back in time to change something, it probably would make things worse than they really are. So, but still again, there's there's so many things about events in history that some people still feel that they really aren't answered, and Kennedy is definitely one of them. I've studied it, and I have to say that there's just so many what people call coincidences, and facts have come forward to prove that these coincidences are not, that they actually happen, and that everything seems to point to the same conclusion, that Kennedy was assassinated because of a conspiracy. And there were several things going on at that time. And it would just be really, I think it would be absolutely imperative if somebody could go back in time. That is the first place anyone should go, and that's the Texas School Book Depository. You should be up there watching and see who else is up there on the 6th floor, who was at that window, who was shooting at Kennedy, if it was just Oswald, because a lot of facts have proven that there was a man behind the picket fence. So there was a triangulation of gunshots, and therefore it is a conspiracy. 9/11, some people have said that these aircraft that went into the Pentagon and so forth, that in that case it was a missile. In the case of the two airliners, there's been photographic evidence I've seen that shows that there is some sort of a missile under the airplane, at least one of them, that hit the Trade Center. And that seems to me like maybe the government was behind that. So, you know, I mean, we could go on and on about, oh, well, that's not true, this happened, that, you know, but really, a time travel event is only for one reason. Really, it's just to prove that it either happened the way that history said it did or it didn't. And then to prove it and then confirm it. Now, how do you confirm it? Well, you take a video camera with you, you go back in time, or you're going forward in time to see other events. And then you come back, and of course, somebody's going to say, well, that's fake. But if you could prove you could go into time, you could probably say, yeah, I did. I went there. I was there. So, an overview of this video is to say, what if, is that if you could go back, or if you could change history, you wouldn't want to. You would just want to prove whether it did happen, so that the questions that have remained for 50 years about Kennedy's assassination as an example would be finally proven one way or the other. And myself, if I went back in time, I know that I would try to change my sister's murder. I'm not saying that if she lived, there would be some significant change in history, but I know that you don't want the people you love to die, and that's one thing that anybody who had the chance to go back in time would do. You would try to stop something like that from happening, and, you know, at least try to put closure to it somehow or another. Just say, hey, I want to find some way of at least telling them I care about them, I love them. And this way, if you can't change what's going to happen, then you at least had a chance to say goodbye to them. So that's another reasoning for time travel, if you could do it, would be to put things right, what were wrong as far as maybe your own personal, you know, regrets, your own personal reasons or feelings about something that happened, and it was too late for you to do anything about it. And, you know, as far as history goes, there's a lot of other points in time that kind of warrant going back in time. July 1947. Anybody who's an avid UFO buff would say, hey, that's Roswell, New Mexico, because this is supposed to be the month and the year of when a UFO crashed in Roswell. And there was actually two of these alien spacecraft that crashed. One was in Corona. The other one was outside of Roswell on the Mac Brazel Ranch. And if you could have somebody there to witness the debris before the military show up, then you could say, okay, that's justified to go in time, back in time, because you can't stop that from happening. But you can prove it beyond a doubt that it happened one way or the other. And there's been recordings made on the radio, which, you know, it's strange. To this day, they still haven't released what was said in those radio broadcasts from WGFL, which is the station in Roswell. The manager of the station has come forward in several interviews since and just said that the government told them you ain't to air this interview because it's going to be a national security issue. And so they never released anything. No transcripts exist apparently, or, as far as what did Mac Brazel say on the interview about what he saw. I mean, it's like the general manager is the one that sits there and talks about it instead of anybody else being able to confirm or deny it. And, other things have come forward about Roswell, that his son, Mac Brazel's son, had kept some of the actual wreckage. And when the government found out, guess what? They're at his door saying, hey, we got to have that stuff too. And then you've got Jesse Marcel, whose son was 10 or 11 years old at the time, and he got to see some of the wreckage too. But it's all hearsay because nobody had any photographic evidence to say this is what it looked like. He didn't get to keep any of the wreckage because the military said, look, you got to turn that stuff in. You can't keep any of it. So his son had to give back this little I-beam that he said, I had kept it. My father shows up and says I got to give it back to him. So these events all warrant a time travel event. But if you went back and you could, let's say, confiscate something like that and bring it back into the future or present time, would anybody believe it? Would anybody say, hey, that's real, Now, some people say that parts of the wreckage of the Roswell crash are small, thin pieces of cellophane or tinfoil, and that when they crushed it in their hands, it folded right back into a perfect flat surface. Well, if you could get that into the future, they can't deny that that's real fact. But again, it's like every time something happens, either the government stops people or somebody else stops you, and then it's just left in limbo for history, and nobody ever knows what really happened. So this really, in a nutshell, is what if you could go back in time? The answer is, if you could you change anything, or would you want to? Would you want to bring back evidence knowing that the government could maybe even go after your family if they found out who you were? And would you put them in danger and say, well, they're not going to do nothing because they don't know who I am? Well, you know what? You show up, they could probably find a way of determining where did you go first when you were first seen. The FBI could have done something, found out who your family is, and then they could have killed them or something like that. So all of those different hyperboles are there, and you don't know what the outcome would have been. So I'm going to leave you with that big question mark of, would you change anything if you could, other than just knowing and trying to prove it through video camera recording or something that this is what happened, and here's the photographic evidence. And that's the only reason anybody would want to try to go back in time to do something. Prove it. Not so much change it. Because if you could change it, you could actually end up killing yourself, or you could kill off the entire human race as far as why these events have happened, and the fact that nobody so far has ever been able to go back in time and really do anything. Not that I've ever heard. I mean, it's all kind of, time travel to me is a science fiction event because there's never been any proof that somebody's been able to do an actual time traveling experiment and it worked, and then they came back with actual evidence. Some people, like the Philadelphia experiment, they said two men went back in 1946 and they came forward in time to 1983 and went back. And let me just say this. Those men, nobody ever heard from them. Nobody ever got anything on camera about, well, what did you do? What really happened? That sort of thing. So that is, to me, an obvious question mark. Did that happen? If it did, why didn't they change anything? So this completes my video today, and I do appreciate everybody listening, and maybe it'll leave you guessing or wondering about whether or not time travel is even relevant if we could do it.